Picture this. You've been wearing the same tunic for 3 weeks straight. You've sweated through a harvest, slept in a mud hut, waded through a river, and sat next to a fire pit that smokes worse than a broken chimney. There's no washing machine humming in the next room. There's no little box of detergent pods sitting under your sink. There's just you, a pile of filthy fabric, and a problem that every single human civilization on Earth has had to solve independently over and over again for thousands of years. And somehow, they figured it out. Not with chemistry degrees, not with factories, with urine, ash, plants, rocks, and an absolutely staggering amount of trial and error. This is the story of how ancient humans washed their clothes. And I promise you, it is so much stranger, so much smellier, and so much more ingenious than you think. Let's start with the obvious question. Did ancient people even bother washing their clothes at all? Because from a modern standpoint, it's easy to imagine that hygiene is a fairly recent invention, that everyone before the 1900s just walked around caked in filth and nobody cared. That is not true. It's actually one of the more persistent myths about ancient life. Humans have cared about being clean, or at least about not smelling like a dead animal, for a very, very long time. But the methods, the tools, and honestly, the sheer creativity involved would make your modern laundry routine look almost embarrassingly easy by comparison. The story really begins with water. Before soap, before detergent, before any kind of chemical cleaning agent existed, the very first laundry technology humans ever developed was simply agitation. You take dirty fabric, you take a river, a stream, or a pool of water, and you beat the absolute daylights out of it. Archaeologists and anthropologists studying surviving indigenous and traditional communities around the world have documented this practice for centuries, and it likely stretches back to the earliest moments humans started wearing woven or draped fabric instead of raw animal hides. You'd take your garment down to the riverbank, soak it, then slap it against a flat rock repeatedly. This is not a gentle process. This is physical labor, sometimes for hours, using the friction and force of impact to loosen dirt, sweat, oils, and grime trapped in the fibers. Then you'd rinse, wring, and lay it out in the sun, because sunlight itself has a mild bleaching and antibacterial effect, something ancient people absolutely noticed, even if they had zero concept of ultraviolet radiation or bacteria. Now here's where it gets interesting, because rock beating and river rinsing gets you a certain amount of clean, but it doesn't get out oil. And ancient clothing, especially wool, was absolutely saturated in oil. Human skin produces sebum, an oily secretion, and wool itself contains lanolin, a natural grease from sheep. Water alone does not effectively dissolve oil. You need something that can bind to both water and grease at the same time. In modern chemistry, we call this a surfactant. Ancient people didn't have that word, but they absolutely figured out the concept. And they figured it out from an unexpected direction. Let's talk about urine. Yes, urine, I know how that sounds, but stay with me here, because this is one of the most important and most overlooked pieces of ancient technology in human history. Urine contains urea, and when urine sits and ages, bacteria break that urea down into ammonia. Ammonia is a genuinely effective degreasing agent. It cuts through oil and grime remarkably well. Somewhere in ancient history, someone noticed that clothes soaked in aged urine came out cleaner than clothes washed in plain water, and from that observation, an entire industry was born. The Romans took this discovery and turned it into a full-blown commercial operation. In ancient Rome, professional laundries called Phalonica existed throughout the empire, and the workers who ran them were called fullers. Their entire profession revolved around cleaning and processing woolen togas, and their primary cleaning agent was stale human urine. Fullers would place large ceramic pots on street corners throughout Roman cities specifically, so that passers-by could relieve themselves into them. This wasn't considered gross or shameful. It was considered civic participation. You contributed to the local economy simply by using the bathroom in the right pot. The urine collected in these pots would be left to age and ferment, becoming more concentrated in ammonia over time, and then it would be transported to the Phalonica, where workers would dilute it, pour it into large stone basins, and literally stomp on the clothing submerged inside, much like people once stomped grapes for wine. Fullers would stand for hours, feet soaking in a mixture of aged urine and water, treading on togas and tunics to work the ammonia deep into the fabric fibers, breaking down oil, sweat, and stains. It was physically demanding, deeply unglamorous work, and it smelled, by every historical account we have, absolutely horrendous. And here's the detail that always gets people. This urine collection business became so profitable and so essential to Roman infrastructure that the Emperor Vespasian, who ruled in the 1st century AD, implemented an actual tax on urine collection. Public urinals became a taxable commodity. When his son Titus reportedly complained that profiting from urine was beneath the dignity of an emperor, Vespasian allegedly held up a coin earned from the tax and said, in Latin, that money doesn't smell. Pecunia non olet. That phrase has survived 2,000 years specifically because of laundry. Ancient Roman laundry logistics gave us a phrase still used today in economics and business ethics discussions. Think about that for a second. Somewhere in a modern finance lecture hall, someone is quoting an emperor whose entire point was justifying a public urine tax that existed to fuel the toga cleaning industry. But the Romans weren't unique in discovering this. Ammonia-based washing, using aged urine, was independently developed across numerous ancient cultures. In parts of ancient Britain, Scotland, and rural Europe, this practice persisted for an almost unbelievably long time. Historical records show that in some parts of Europe, families were still collecting urine specifically for washing wool well into the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly in the wool processing industry, where a chemical treatment called scouring required ammonia to strip lanolin from raw wool before it could be spun into thread. This wasn't some primitive footnote. It was standard industrial practice for literally thousands of years. Now let's move to a completely different but equally important thread in this story, and that's soap. Because urine can degrease fabric, but it doesn't produce the kind of rich lather we associate with actual soap, and ancient people absolutely did develop true soap-like substances, remarkably early. The earliest known evidence of a soap-like material comes from ancient Babylon, and we're talking around 2800 BC. Archaeologists have found clay cylinders inscribed with a formula describing the boiling of fats together with ash, which is essentially the fundamental chemical process behind soap making, known today as saponification. When you combine fat or oil with an alkaline substance, and wood ash contains potassium carbonate, which is naturally alkaline, a chemical reaction occurs that produces a new compound entirely, one that can bind to both water and oil simultaneously. This is soap. Real, functional, if somewhat crude, soap and the Babylonians were doing this nearly 5,000 years ago. The ancient Egyptians took this even further. A medical document known as the Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1550 BC, describes Egyptians combining animal and vegetable oils with alkaline salts to create a soap-like substance used both for treating skin conditions and for washing. Egypt is also where we get some of the earliest evidence of a natural mineral called natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate found in dry lake beds, most famously around the Wadi Natron region. Natron is alkaline. It absorbs oil and moisture, and the Egyptians used it for everything from mummification to cleaning fabric and even bathing. If you've ever wondered why ancient Egyptian depictions of clothing look so remarkably crisp and white in tomb paintings, natron and intense sun bleaching are a big part of that answer. Here's where the story gets genuinely fascinating, though, because soap made from ash and fat wasn't just a Middle Eastern innovation. It appears to have developed independently, or at least in parallel, across multiple regions. Ancient Gauls and Germanic tribes in what is now France and Germany were documented by Roman writers, including Pliny the Elder in the 1st century AD, as producing a substance called sapo, made from goat tallow and beech ash, which they used primarily as a hair treatment, sometimes to create that dramatic reddish, spiked hairstyle you see in depictions of Celtic warriors. The Romans initially viewed this as strange foreign hair gel rather than a cleaning product, which is honestly a hilarious historical footnote. It took centuries before Mediterranean cultures widely adopted soap specifically for washing clothing and bodies, even though the basic chemistry had existed among their northern neighbors the entire time. Meanwhile, on a completely different continent, ancient civilizations in the Americas were solving the exact same problem, using an entirely different resource: plants. Indigenous peoples throughout North and South America discovered that certain plants contain natural compounds called saponins, which behave remarkably similarly to manufactured soap. The roots of the yucca plant, when crushed and mixed with water, produce a genuinely foamy, soapy lather. This wasn't a minor curiosity. Yucca root soap was used extensively by numerous indigenous nations for washing hair, skin, and textiles, and it remains in use in some traditional practices today. Similarly, in South America, the bark of the quillaya tree, sometimes called the soap bark tree, was used for centuries as a natural detergent. And it wasn't just the Americas. Across Europe and Asia, a plant called soapwort, scientific name Saponaria officinalis, was cultivated specifically for its cleaning properties. When the leaves, stems, or roots of soapwort are crushed and agitated in water, they release saponins that create a gentle, effective lather. Medieval European launderers used soapwort extensively. And remarkably, museum conservators and textile historians still use soapwort today to clean extremely delicate historical fabrics because it's gentler than modern detergent and won't damage centuries-old fibers. Think about that. A cleaning method developed by ancient and medieval people is still considered the safest option for preserving history's most fragile textiles. In ancient China, laundry practices developed along their own trajectory, using a substance derived from the gladitsia tree, commonly known as the soap pod or honey locust tree. The pods of this tree contain natural saponins, and for centuries, Chinese households would boil these pods to create a cleaning liquid used for washing both hair and clothing. Alongside this, wood ash lye solutions were extremely common, similar to practices seen in Babylon and Egypt, suggesting that the basic principle, alkaline ash breaking down oil and grime, was essentially reinvented independently by cultures with no contact with one another whatsoever. That's one of the wildest parts of this whole story. Civilizations separated by oceans and mountain ranges with zero communication arrived at strikingly similar chemical solutions because the underlying physics and chemistry of dirt, oil, and water are universal. Nature basically handed every culture on Earth the same puzzle, and independently, they all found remarkably similar answers. Let's talk about a detail that rarely gets mentioned, but completely changes how you should picture ancient laundry day. It was not a quiet, solitary chore. It was intensely, unavoidably social, because rivers, streams, and communal washing areas were often the only water sources large enough and clean enough for the task. Laundry day frequently became a gathering point, particularly for women, who in most ancient and traditional societies were primarily responsible for washing clothing. Historical and anthropological records from ancient Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, and traditional societies across Africa and Asia consistently describe communal washing sites as places of conversation, gossip, singing, and social bonding. In ancient Greek literature, including in Homer's Odyssey, there is an entire scene where the Princess Nausicaa goes down to a river with her attendants specifically to wash clothing, and it's treated as a normal, almost cheerful social outing, not a miserable chore performed in isolation. Washing was communal labor, and communal labor throughout basically all of human history tends to become a social occasion whether the work itself is pleasant or not. Now, what about drying and finishing? Because getting clothes clean was only half the ancient laundry battle. Fabric in the ancient world was precious. It took an enormous amount of labor to produce, spinning thread by hand, weaving on manual looms, dyeing with natural pigments extracted from plants, insects, and minerals. A single garment could represent weeks or months of labor. So ancient people were deeply invested in making sure the washing process didn't destroy what they'd worked so hard to create. This is part of why sun drying was so universally favored. Sunlight naturally bleaches and disinfects fabric to a degree, and laying garments out on grass, bushes, or flat stones allowed air circulation that prevented mildew, a genuine and serious threat in an era before synthetic fibers and modern storage. There's also a substance worth mentioning called Fuller's Earth, a naturally occurring clay mineral with strong absorbent properties. The Romans and later medieval Europeans used fuller's earth extensively in the cloth finishing process, particularly for wool. After washing, fuller's earth would be worked into damp fabric to absorb residual oils and to help felt and thicken the material, giving wool cloth a denser, more durable finish. This is actually where the profession of fuller gets its name, tied directly to this specific clay-based finishing technique, separate from, but related to, the urine treading process we talked about earlier. Perfume and scent also played an enormous role in ancient approaches to cleanliness, arguably an even bigger role than actual washing in some contexts. Wealthy Romans, Egyptians, and Greeks frequently used scented oils, herbs, and incense not just on their bodies, but on stored clothing, precisely because thorough washing was labor-intensive and clothing could not be laundered as frequently as we do today. Cedar wood, lavender, and various aromatic herbs were commonly placed among stored garments, both to mask odor and, unknowingly, to repel moths and other fabric-destroying insects. Ancient people had figured out a functional form of pest control through scent, centuries before anyone understood the biological mechanism behind why certain smells kept insects away. So what does all of this actually tell us? It tells us that cleanliness, in some form, has been a human priority for an almost unimaginably long stretch of time, and that ingenuity around solving the problem of dirty clothing developed again and again across completely disconnected civilizations. Babylon figured out saponification nearly 5,000 years ago. Egypt developed natron-based cleaning alongside sophisticated bleaching techniques. Rome built an entire urban infrastructure and taxation system around urine collection for industrial-scale laundering. Indigenous peoples across multiple continents discovered plant-based saponins entirely independently of one another. Medieval Europeans refined soapwort and lye-based washing into household staples that, in some cases, are still used by textile conservators today because nothing modern does the job as gently or as well. None of this was handed down from some single inventor or civilization. It emerged, again and again, from ordinary people paying close attention to the world around them, noticing that certain ash made grease disappear, that certain roots foamed up in water, that stale urine somehow left wool cleaner than plain water ever could. It's a reminder that so much of what we take for granted as basic modern convenience, tossing a load of laundry into a machine and forgetting about it for an hour, sits on top of thousands of years of quiet, unglamorous, often genuinely unpleasant human experimentation. Someone, somewhere, thousands of years before written history even existed in most of the world, decided to test whether soaking their clothes in urine actually worked. And it did. And that discovery echoed forward through Babylon, through Egypt, through Rome, through the wool trade of medieval Britain, all the way to the moment your grandparents' generation still occasionally used homemade lye soap because it worked better than anything you could buy in a store. So the next time you're standing in front of a washing machine, tossing in a pod of pre-measured detergent, sparing barely a thought for the process at all, take a second to imagine an ancient Roman fuller standing knee deep in a stone basin of fermented urine, stomping togas clean under the hot Mediterranean sun, genuinely proud of his craft. Imagine a woman in ancient Mesopotamia boiling animal fat with wood ash, discovering something that would still be chemically identical to the soap sitting in your bathroom right now. Imagine an indigenous community in the American Southwest crushing yucca root into a foaming lather thousands of years before anyone in Europe had ever heard the word detergent. History isn't just kings and wars and monuments. Sometimes it's just people standing by a river, figuring out how to get the smell of a long, hard day out of the only clothes they owned. And somehow, against all odds, working across cultures who never even knew the others existed, they all found their way to remarkably similar answers, written not in books, but in ash, oil, water, and yes, more than a little bit of urine.